Lyra didn't know that the stranger she'd bumped into outside the diner was tracking her scent. She didn't know he'd been searching every territory, every hidden valley, every forgotten town in the Three Kingdoms for exactly 1,095 days. And she certainly didn't know that Alpha King Damon Blackthorne had finally found her. And this time she had nowhere left to run. The mountain town of Cedar Falls had seemed perfect when she'd arrived 6 weeks ago. Remote enough that the bus only came twice a week. Small enough that strangers were noticed but not questioned too closely if they paid their rent on time and kept to themselves. Cold enough that most people stayed indoors after dark, which meant fewer eyes on her comings and goings. She'd lasted longer here than anywhere else in the past year. The diner job was steady, the tips decent enough to keep her fed and housed in the tiny room above the hardware store. Mrs. Chen, who owned the place, asked no questions about her past and paid in cash. For 6 weeks, Lyra had almost convinced herself she could stay. Almost. The exhaustion was bone deep now. 3 years of looking over her shoulder, of jumping at shadows, of never sleeping without one ear open for footsteps in the hallway. 3 years of new names, new stories, new towns when the old ones started feeling too much like home. Emma in Portland, Sarah in Denver, Rachel in Boise, and now Lyra in Cedar Falls, though that name felt more real than any of the others had. She'd been tired before she'd even started running. Tired of being afraid, tired of being alone, tired of the constant ache in her chest that felt like something vital had been torn away. But running was what she knew how to do. Running was survival. The stranger had been tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat that looked expensive, even in the dim light outside the diner. She'd been fumbling with her keys, mind elsewhere, when she'd walked straight into his chest, solid as a wall, warm despite the October cold. "Sorry," she'd mumbled, not looking up, already stepping around him toward the alley that led to her back entrance. "Excuse me?" He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but something in the air had shifted, like the moment before a lightning strike when every hair on your body stands on end. She should have looked up then, should have trusted the instinct that made her pulse quicken and her steps falter, should have recognized the scent that made something deep in her chest pull tight with longing and terror in equal measure. Instead, she'd hurried up the narrow stairs to her room, double-locked the door, and tried to convince herself that the trembling in her hands was from the cold. That had been 4 hours ago. Now she sat on the edge of her narrow bed, everything she owned packed into the same battered duffel bag she'd been carrying for 3 years. The bus schedule was taped to the wall beside her bed. Next departure, 6 a.m. to Spokane. She had enough cash for a ticket and maybe a week's worth of cheap motels while she found work. It was time to run again. The feeling in her chest had been growing stronger all evening, that strange combination of panic and yearning that always meant trouble. It was the same feeling that had sent her fleeing from Seattle when she'd glimpsed a familiar face in the crowd. The same feeling that had driven her out of Minneapolis in the middle of the night when she'd caught a scent that reminded her too much of home. Home, as if she'd ever really had one. She was reaching for her bag when the shadows in the corner of her room shifted, not shifted, moved. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as a figure stepped forward from where no figure should have been able to hide. Tall, broad, wearing a dark coat that looked expensive even in the dim light from her single lamp. The stranger from outside the diner. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he moved with fluid grace to stand between her and the only exit. Not threatening exactly, but unmistakably blocking her path. His face was partially hidden in shadow, but she could see the glint of his eyes. Dark, familiar in a way that made her soul ache. "Hello, Lyra," he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered. Deep, rich, patient, the kind of voice that could command armies or gentle, frightened creatures with equal ease. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at the man she'd been running from for 3 years, the man who'd haunted her dreams and her nightmares in equal measure. Alpha King Damon Blackthorne, the most powerful shifter in North America, The man she'd seen covered in blood, standing over a body with those same dark eyes glowing gold in the moonlight. The man the golden thread in her chest had been pulling her towards since the moment she'd first caught his scent. "No!" she whispered, scrambling backward until her spine hit the wall. "No, no, no, you can't be here. I was careful. I was so careful." He took a step closer, hands visible and empty, movements slow and deliberate. "You were. You're very good at disappearing, little wolf. It took me longer to find you than I'd hoped." I'm not going back." Her voice cracked on the words. "I can't. You don't understand what I saw, what you did." Something flickered across his features. Pain, maybe, or regret. "I understand more than you think, and I'm not here to drag you back." She laughed, high and desperate. "Right, because Alpha Kings are known for taking no for an answer. This Alpha King is." He stopped moving, staying a careful distance away, close enough that she could smell him, pine and earth and something wild that made her wolf whine with longing, far enough that she didn't feel physically trapped. "I'm not here to force anything, Lyra. I'm just here to talk." "Talk." She shook her head, fingers clawing at the wall behind her, as if she could somehow melt through it. "We have nothing to talk about. I know what you are, what you do to people who—" "Stop running!" The words cut through her panic like a blade, not harsh but firm, final. When she looked at him, really looked at him, she could see his face clearly for the first time in 3 years. He looked tired, older. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a weight to his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and long searches. His dark hair was longer than she remembered, and there was something almost vulnerable in the way he stood there, hands loose at his sides, waiting. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. "I need you to know that. Whatever you think you saw, whatever you think you know about me, I would never hurt you. I couldn't." The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, almost painful in its intensity. Her wolf was pacing, caught between the urge to run and the deeper, more primitive need to close the distance between them, to touch, to claim, to finally come home. She pressed her hands flat against the wall, using the solid surface to anchor herself. "I saw what you did." "I know." His voice was infinitely gentle. "And tomorrow when you're ready I'll explain what you saw, but tonight all I'm asking is that you stop running, not forever, just long enough to hear me out." "And if I say no?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she could see the battle playing out across his features, the alpha who commanded without question, warring with the man who understood her fear. "Then I'll leave," he said finally. "And I won't follow you again. But Lyra—" He took one small step closer, and the gold in his eyes was unmistakable now. "I'm hoping you won't say no, because I've been looking for you for 3 years, and I'm tired of pretending I can live without you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She could feel tears burning behind her eyes, 3 years of loneliness and fear, and desperate, hopeless wanting rising up in her throat like a sob. She'd been so tired for so long. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of fighting the pull in her chest that never faded no matter how far she ran or how much distance she put between them. Tired of being afraid of the one person in the world who made her feel like she might finally be able to stop. "I won't go with you," Lyra said, the words rushing out in a desperate whisper. "I can't. You can't make me." Damon's expression softened, and he raised his hands slowly, palms facing her. "I'm not going to make you do anything. I just want to talk." That's what they all say. She pressed herself harder against the wall, as if she could somehow disappear into the faded wallpaper. "Right before they drag you back to face whatever punishment they think you deserve." "Who told you that?" His voice carried a sharp edge now, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of the Alpha King beneath the careful gentleness. "Who made you believe that's what I would do?" She shook her head, unable to speak past the terror clawing at her throat. How could she explain that it wasn't what anyone had told her? It was what she'd seen, what she'd witnessed that night 3 years ago in the forest clearing, when she'd followed the sounds of fighting and found him standing over Marcus Reeves's broken body. The memory hit her like a physical blow, as vivid now as it had been then. Blood soaked into the earth, the sickening crack of bones, Damon's eyes blazing gold in the moonlight as he looked down at what was left of the man who'd been courting her. "I saw you kill him," she whispered, the words scraping raw from her throat. "I saw what you did to Marcus." Damon went very still, so still that for a moment she wondered if he'd somehow stopped breathing. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. "Tell me what you saw." "I don't want to remember. Please." The word was soft but weighted with 3 years of searching, 3 years of wondering why she'd run from him that night without a word. "I need to understand what you think happened." She closed her eyes, but that only made the memory sharper. "I was walking back from town, late, and I heard fighting in the woods, shouting. I should have gone the other way, but I was worried someone might be hurt, so I followed the sound." Her breath hitched. There was a clearing, and you were there, and Marcus was on the ground, and there was so much blood. What else? The question was barely more than a breath, but something in his tone made her open her eyes. He was watching her with an intensity that should have frightened her, but instead of the predatory gleam she expected, she saw something that looked almost like hope. "You looked right at me," she continued, her voice growing steadier. "Your eyes were gold, and you had blood on your hands, and I knew that if Marcus hadn't been enough to satisfy whatever rage was driving you, I would be next." Damon was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him processing her words, weighing them against some internal scale she couldn't read. "And then, what did you do?" "I ran." The admission felt like a confession. "I ran home, packed everything I could carry, and left town before dawn. I've been running ever since." 3 years, he said softly. 3 years of thinking I was a monster. "Aren't you?" The words hung between them like a challenge. She expected anger, expected the violence she'd been imagining for 3 years. Instead, he laughed, but there was no humour in the sound, only pain. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but never with you, never for you." Before she could ask what that meant, he was moving, not toward her, but toward the single chair by her small table. He sat down slowly, deliberately making himself smaller, less threatening. The gesture was so unexpected that it knocked something loose in her chest. "Marcus Reeves was not the man you thought he was," he said quietly. "He wasn't courting you because he cared about you. He was courting you because you're my mate, and he knew it would destroy me to lose you." The words hit her like cold water. "That's impossible. We're not." "We are." His eyes found hers, and the gold was still there, but softer now, sadder. "I felt it the first time I scented you in town. The bond snapped into place so hard it nearly brought me to my knees, and apparently I wasn't the only one who noticed." She shook her head frantically. "No, that can't be true. I would have known. I would have felt—" "You did feel it." His voice was gentle but certain. "That's why you're afraid, not of me hurting you, but of what it means if you stop running. What it means if you let yourself trust what your wolf has been telling you since the moment we met." The golden thread in her chest pulsed, and she gasped at the sudden intensity of it. Warm, insistent, pulling her toward him with a force that made her fingers ache with the effort of staying pressed against the wall. "The night you saw me with Marcus," Damon continued, "he'd been bragging in the tavern about how he was going to claim you, how he was going to mark you and present you to me as a gift, a way to show that he was strong enough to take what belonged to the Alpha King." Horror crawled up her spine. "He wouldn't. Marcus was kind. He brought me flowers." "Marcus brought you wolfsbane hidden in those flowers." The words were soft, but they landed like blows. "Small amounts, just enough to weaken the bond between us, to make it harder for you to feel the pull, harder for you to recognize what you were to me. He'd been poisoning you for weeks." "No." But even as she said it, she remembered the headaches, the strange fatigue that had settled over her in those final weeks before everything fell apart. The way her dreams had been filled with shadows and golden eyes that left her aching when she woke. I went to him that night to warn him away from you, to tell him that if he came near you again, there would be consequences. Damon's jaw tightened. He laughed, said it was too late, that he'd already claimed you, that you'd be carrying his mark by morning whether you wanted it or not. The world tilted around her. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her legs unable to hold her weight. You killed him to protect me. I killed him because he was planning to rape you. The words were flat, matter-of-fact, but she could hear the leashed violence beneath them. Because he thought your consent was optional. Because he saw you as a prize to be won rather than a person to be cherished. She stared at him, trying to reconcile this version of events with the one that had been driving her nightmares for 3 years. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you explain? Because you ran before I could. There was no accusation in his voice, only tired sadness. By the time I realized you'd witnessed it, by the time I tracked you to your house, you were already gone. I've been searching for you ever since, trying to find a way to explain what you saw. The room felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in from all sides. 3 years. 3 years of running from the one person who'd been trying to save her. 3 years of believing herself a coward when she was actually a survivor of something she'd never even realized was happening. I'm sorry. The words were barely a whisper. I'm so sorry. You thought exactly what anyone would think in your position. He leaned forward in the chair, but didn't try to close the distance between them. You saw violence and you protected yourself. That's not something to apologize for. The golden thread in her chest was pulling steadily now, a warm current that made her want to cross the room and curl up in his arms. The urge was so strong it left her breathless. The bond, she said shakily. I can feel it. It's been there all along, hasn't it? Since the moment we met, he confirmed. Though it was muted by the wolfsbane at first, that's why it's so intense now. 3 years of separation, 3 years of fighting something that was always meant to be. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd stepped out of the shadows. The tiredness in his face, the careful way he held himself as if he was afraid any sudden movement might send her running again. The hope in his eyes that he was trying so hard to keep contained. You've been looking for me for 3 years, she said, testing the words. Every day. And you're not angry that I ran? I'm angry that you felt like you had to. His hands clenched into fists in his lap, then deliberately relaxed. I'm angry that someone hurt you badly enough that your first instinct was to assume the worst of me, but angry at you? Never. The sincerity in his voice was devastating. She'd spent so long expecting punishment, expecting rage, that his gentleness felt like a physical ache in her chest. What happens now? She whispered. Now we take it one step at a time. He stood slowly, moving toward the door. Now you get some rest, and tomorrow, if you're willing, we'll talk more. About the bond, about what it means, about what you want. She scrambled to her feet, panic flaring. You're leaving? He paused with his hand on the doorknob. Unless you want me to stay. The admission was out before she could stop it. I don't want to be alone. Something shifted in his expression, warmth blooming across his features like sunrise. Then I'll stay as long as you need me to. And for the first time in 3 years, Lyra felt like she might finally be able to stop running. They ended up at the diner. It seemed safer somehow, meeting on neutral ground, with the fluorescent lights casting everything in stark relief and the occasional rumble of a late-night truck on the highway outside. Lyra sat across from Damon in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The night manager, Jim, had barely glanced up when they'd walked in together. Cedar Falls was the kind of place where people minded their own business, especially at 2 in the morning. Still, Lyra felt exposed under the bright lights, as if everyone could see the golden thread stretched taut between them. "Tell me about the mate bond," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the table between them. "I need to understand what this means." Damon was quiet for a moment, his own coffee untouched. When she finally looked up at him, his expression was careful, measured. "What do you know about fated mates?" "Almost nothing." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "My parents died when I was young, and the foster families after that were all human. I know the basics about shifting, about pack structure, but the deeper wolf traditions—" She trailed off, shrugging helplessly. "Then we'll start at the beginning." His voice was gentle, patient. "A mate bond is a supernatural connection between two wolves whose souls are compatible. It's not common. Maybe 1 in 1,000 wolves finds their true mate. When it happens, it's—" He paused, searching for words. "It's like finding the other half of yourself, the part you didn't even know was missing." Something in her chest fluttered at his words. "And you felt that with me?" "The moment I caught your scent." His eyes met hers, and she could see the memory there, vivid and immediate. "I was visiting Cedar Falls on pack business, just passing through, but then the wind shifted, and I smelled wildflowers and rain and something uniquely you, and my world tilted on its axis." She remembered that day, 6 months before everything fell apart, before Marcus, before the running. She'd been walking home from the market when a sleek black car had pulled up beside her. The window had rolled down, and she'd found herself looking into the darkest eyes she'd ever seen. "You offered me a ride," she said softly. "You turned me down." There was a hint of a smile on his lips now. Very politely, but firmly, said you didn't get in cars with strangers. "I should have been more afraid." The admission slipped out before she could stop it. "You were clearly powerful, clearly dangerous, but I just felt—" She struggled to find the words. "Safe, like I could trust you completely, even though I didn't know your name. That was the bond." His voice was warm now, fond. "Your wolf recognizing mine, even if your human mind couldn't understand what was happening." She thought about those early days, the strange dreams that had started after their first meeting. Dreams of golden eyes and strong hands, and a warmth that seemed to seep into her bones. Dreams that had left her aching and restless when she woke. "Why didn't you tell me then?" she asked. "Why the courtship, the careful approach?" Damon's expression darkened. "Because you were barely 21, alone in the world, and I was the alpha king. The power imbalance was already massive without adding the supernatural pressure of a mate bond on top of it." He leaned forward slightly. "I wanted you to choose me for me, not because fate said you should." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time in 3 years. Not the monster from her nightmares, but a man who'd been trying to court her properly, who'd been giving her time and space to make her own choices. "You were protecting me," she whispered, "even from yourself." "I was trying to." His jaw tightened. "Clearly I didn't do a very good job of it. Marcus knew, though, about the bond." "Marcus was my cousin. Distant, but still family. He'd been at court when I came back that first day, half out of my mind with the scent of my mate." Damon's hands clenched on the table. "I should have been more careful, should have known he'd see an opportunity." Lyra reached across the table without thinking, covering his fisted hands with her smaller ones. The moment their skin made contact, heat shot up her arm like lightning. The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, and she gasped at the intensity of it. Damon went very still beneath her touch. Lyra. Her name was a warning and a prayer all at once. She could feel his pulse jumping beneath her fingertips, could see the way his eyes had darkened to near black. The bond was singing between them now, a current of want and need, and 3 years of separation demanding to be bridged. She should have pulled away, should have put distance between them before the connection could deepen further. Instead, she turned her hands palm up, threading their fingers together. "It's strong," she breathed, "stronger than I expected." 3 years of fighting it. His voice was rough, strained. 3 years of thinking I might never see you again. The bond doesn't like to be ignored. She could feel it, the way the connection seemed to reach beneath her skin, settling into her bones like it belonged there. Like it had always belonged there, and she'd just been too blind to see it. What would have happened if Marcus had succeeded? The question came out small, frightened. If he'd marked me? Damon's face went hard. It wouldn't have worked. You can't be marked by anyone but your true mate, but the attempt... He trailed off, his grip on her hands tightening. It would have been agony for you, and it would have killed me. Killed you. If another wolf had tried to claim you, tried to force a bond that wasn't meant to be, the backlash through our connection would have stopped my heart. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. Assuming I didn't die from the rage first. The casualness with which he talked about his own death stole her breath. You would have died for me, someone you barely knew. I would have died because of you, he corrected gently. Because losing your mate is like losing half your soul. Most wolves don't survive it. She stared at their joined hands, at the way her pale fingers looked against his darker ones. 3 years. 3 years she'd spent believing she was running from a monster, when she'd actually been running from the one person in the world who would literally die if she were hurt. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, I didn't understand." You had no way of knowing. His thumbs stroked across her knuckles, and she shivered at the simple touch. And honestly, part of me was glad you ran. She looked up sharply. "What? If you'd stayed that night, if you'd come to me after witnessing what happened with Marcus, I would have claimed you immediately." His eyes were blazing now, gold threading through the dark. "I would have marked you and bonded you to me before you had a chance to process what had happened. The alpha in me doesn't handle threats to my mate well." The words sent heat spiralling through her, dangerous and intoxicating. She could picture it. Damon's teeth in her throat, his mark burning on her skin, the bond snapping fully into place between them. The image should have terrified her. Instead, it made something deep in her core clench with want. "And now," she managed, "now I want you to choose me because you want to, not because you feel like you have to." His voice was soft, but she could hear the struggle beneath the words. "The bond is there, will always be there, but what we do about it is up to you." She pulled her hands free and immediately missed his warmth. "What if I'm not ready? What if I need time?" "Then you'll have all the time you need." The answer came without hesitation. "I waited 3 years to find you again. I can wait however long it takes for you to trust me. Even if I decide I don't want the bond." Something flickered across his face. Pain, loss, acceptance. "Even then, though I hope you won't." His honesty was devastating. She could see the cost of the words, the way his whole body had gone tense with the effort of making the offer. But he meant it. Somehow she knew he meant it. "I've been alone for so long," she admitted. "Even before I started running. I don't know how to be part of something bigger than myself." "You don't have to know yet." He leaned back in the booth, giving her space to breathe. "We can take it slow, one conversation at a time." "Is that what you want? Slow?" The question hung between them, loaded with 3 years of separation and want and careful restraint. When Damon answered, his voice was carefully controlled. "What I want is to take you home to my territory and spend the next month convincing you that you're safe with me. What I want is to mark you and bond you and make sure nothing can ever take you away from me again." His eyes found hers, and she could see the truth there, raw and unguarded. "But what I want doesn't matter as much as what you need." The admission broke something open in her chest. She'd spent so long being afraid, so long believing, that caring for someone meant giving up pieces of herself until nothing remained. But Damon was offering her something different. A choice, agency over her own destiny. "I need time," she said quietly. Not forever, but time to adjust, to understand what this means. Then you'll have it. And I need honesty. No more secrets. No more protection by omission. Done. And I need—" she hesitated, then pushed forward. "I need to know that you'll still want me when you realize I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. Running changes you, makes you harder." Damon was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable. Finally he spoke. "Lyra, I fell in love with your strength before I fell in love with anything else. The woman who survived 3 years alone, who built a life for herself in a dozen different towns, who never stopped fighting even when she was terrified. That woman is exactly who I want." His voice dropped lower. "Hard isn't the opposite of lovable. Sometimes it's the most lovable thing of all." The words hit her like a physical touch, warming places that had been cold for so long she'd forgotten they existed. For the first time since he'd stepped out of the shadows in her room, she let herself really look at him. Not as the monster from her nightmares or the alpha king from the stories, but as the man who'd been searching for her for 3 years. He was beautiful, not in the pretty way that had always made her self-conscious, but in the devastating way of something wild that had chosen to be gentle. Dark hair that looked soft enough to run her fingers through. Strong hands that had killed to protect her, eyes that held 3 years of patience and hope and careful restraint. And he was hers. Fate had looked at all the wolves in all the world and decided they belonged together. The thought should have been overwhelming. Instead, for the first time in 3 years, it felt like coming home. The attack came at dawn. Lyra woke to the sound of glass shattering, her body moving before her mind had fully processed the danger. 3 years of running had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now they were screaming at her to move. She rolled off the narrow bed, hitting the floor as footsteps thundered up the stairs outside her door. Heavy boots, multiple sets, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that meant this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. They'd found her. "Damon," she whispered, but he was already there, materializing from the shadows by the window like he'd never left. His face was hard, focused, nothing like the gentle man who'd sat across from her in the diner just hours before. "How many?" His voice was barely a breath, but she caught the deadly calm in it. 3, maybe 4. She pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. "They're coming up fast. Stay down. Stay quiet. Whatever happens, don't run until I tell you to." Before she could ask what he meant, her door exploded inward. The first man through was massive, easily 6.5 feet of muscle and scarred flesh. She recognized him immediately, Victor Reeves, Marcus's older brother. Behind him came 2 more men, both armed, both moving with the fluid grace of trained killers. "Well, well," Victor's voice was gravelly, amused. The little rabbit who thought she could hide. Lyra's blood went cold. She'd known this moment would come eventually, had nightmares about it for 3 years. Marcus had been Victor's favourite cousin, his heir apparent. She'd always known he wouldn't let his death go unanswered. "Where is he?" Victor continued, scanning the small room. "Where's the Alpha King who thinks he can kill my family without consequences?" "Right here." Damon stepped into view, and Lyra bit back a gasp. This wasn't the patient, gentle man from the diner. This was the Alpha King in all his terrifying glory. Power rolled off him in waves, making the air itself feel heavy and charged. His eyes were blazing gold, and when he smiled, she could see the sharp points of canine teeth. "Victor?" His voice was conversational, almost friendly. "I was wondering when you'd work up the courage to come for me directly." Victor's jaw tightened. "You murdered my cousin in cold blood." "I executed a would-be rapist." Damon's tone didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Predatory. Deadly. "If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to discuss it with me, away from her." "Oh no." Victor's eyes found Lyra crouched against the wall, and his smile turned cruel. "She's the whole point. Marcus died for this little wolf. Seems only fitting she should pay the price." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. When Damon spoke again, his voice was soft as silk and twice as dangerous. "Touch her, and I'll do to you what I did to Marcus, only slower," Victor laughed. "Big words from a king with no army. You're outnumbered, Blackthorn, 3-1. I like those odds." "Then you don't know me very well." What happened next was over so fast that Lyra almost missed it. One moment Victor and his men were advancing, confident in their numbers. The next, Damon was moving like liquid shadow, faster than should have been possible for something so large. He hit the first man, not Victor, but one of the lackeys, with enough force to send him crashing through the thin wall into the next room. The sound was tremendous, like a building collapsing, but Damon was already turning, already moving to the second man. This one had a gun, was raising it with trained precision. It didn't matter. Damon caught his wrist, twisted, and the sharp crack of breaking bones filled the air. The gun clattered to the floor, forgotten. Victor roared and lunged forward, shifting mid-leap into a massive brown wolf with foam at its muzzle. But Damon was ready for him, meeting him halfway in a collision that shook the entire building. They went down hard, a tangle of claws and teeth and barely controlled fury. Victor was huge even in wolf form, easily twice the size of a normal shifter. But Damon was faster, stronger and infinitely more experienced. It was over in less than 30 seconds. When the dust settled, Damon stood over Victor's human form, one hand wrapped around the other man's throat. Victor was conscious but immobilized, blood trickling from a dozen cuts across his face and chest. "Here's what's going to happen," Damon said conversationally, as if he weren't holding a man's life in his hands. "You're going to gather what's left of Marcus's supporters, and you're going to explain to them that this ends here. Today. Now." Victor snarled something that might have been a curse, but Damon's grip tightened, cutting off his air supply. "I wasn't asking," Damon continued. "I was telling you, because the alternative is that I declare war on the entire Reeves pack, and we both know how that will end." Lyra watched from her position against the wall, frozen between terror and fascination. This was the man she'd been running from for 3 years. This casual, devastating violence, this absolute control over life and death. But as she watched, she realized something that made her breath catch in her throat. He was protecting her. Every move, every strike, every calculated word was designed to neutralize the threat against her with maximum efficiency and minimum collateral damage. He wasn't killing for pleasure or dominance. He was eliminating a problem that threatened his mate. When Victor finally nodded his understanding, Damon released him and stepped back. "You have until sunset to be out of my territory. If I see you or any of your people near her again, I won't be so generous next time." Victor struggled to his feet, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. But he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. He gathered his unconscious men and limped toward the destroyed doorway, pausing only to spit a final curse. "This isn't over, Blackthorn." "Yes," Damon said quietly, "it is." When they were gone, silence fell over the destroyed room like a heavy blanket. Lyra stayed pressed against the wall, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline making her feel jittery and strange. "Are you hurt?" Damon's voice was gentle again, the deadly Alpha King replaced by the careful man from the diner. He approached her slowly, hands visible and non-threatening, as if she were a wild creature that might bolt. "I'm fine." The words came out steadier than she'd expected. "You?" "Nothing that won't heal." He had cuts on his arms, she realized, claw marks that were already beginning to close. "Lyra, I need you to know. You saved me." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "They came here to kill me, and you saved me." He stopped moving, something flickering across his face. "You're not afraid?" She thought about it seriously, taking inventory of her emotions. Terror, yes, but not of him. Relief, gratitude, and underneath it all, something that felt dangerously like pride. "I should be," she said honestly. 3 years ago, seeing you like that would have sent me running again. But now—" She pushed herself away from the wall, taking a step toward him. "Now I understand what I'm seeing." "And what's that?" "Protection." Another step. "You didn't enjoy that. You didn't lose control. You did exactly what needed to be done to keep me safe, and nothing more." Something in his expression softened. "The Alpha King isn't a role I like to play. It's necessary sometimes, but it's not who I want to be with you." "But it's who you are." She was close enough to touch him now, to see the gold still flickering in his eyes. "And you use that power to protect me, not to control me, not to claim me, but to keep me safe." "Yes." The simple honesty in the word made her chest tight. She reached up slowly, giving him time to pull away, and touched the side of his face. His skin was warm, solid, real. "Thank you," she whispered. His eyes closed at her touch, and for a moment she saw past all the careful control to the man underneath. Tired, worried, still coming down from the adrenaline of thinking he might lose her again. "I was terrified," he admitted, leaning into her touch. "When I heard them coming, when I realized they'd found you, I thought—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "I thought I might be too late again." "You weren't." She stroked her thumb across his cheekbone, marveling at the fact that this dangerous, powerful man was letting her comfort him. "You were exactly where you needed to be." They stood like that for a long moment, her hand on his face, both of them breathing hard from adrenaline and relief. The room around them was destroyed, her few possessions scattered and broken, but none of that seemed to matter. What mattered was the way he'd moved to protect her without hesitation, the way he'd controlled his own violence to use exactly what was needed and no more. The way he was looking at her now, like she was precious beyond measure. "We need to leave," he said finally, though he made no move to step away from her touch. "Victor might have more men coming, and this place isn't secure anymore." "Where will we go?" "Somewhere safe, somewhere I can protect you properly." She nodded, but didn't drop her hand. "Damon?" "Yes?" "When we get wherever we're going, I want to talk, really talk, about the bond, about what this means, about—" She took a shaky breath. "About whether I'm ready to stop running." His eyes flew open, searching her face. "Lyra—" "I'm not saying yes to everything right now," she said quickly. "But I'm not saying no either. I'm saying I want to try, to see what happens if I stop being afraid." The smile that crossed his face was like sunrise after a long, dark night. "That's all I could ever ask for." And for the first time in 3 years, Lyra believed him. They drove through the mountains as dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Damon's truck was warm and quiet, the steady rumble of the engine almost hypnotic after the violence of the morning. Lyra sat in the passenger seat, watching the landscape change from the sparse high desert of Cedar Falls to the dense forests of his territory. With every mile she felt something in her chest loosening, like a knot that had been tied too tight for too long. "Tell me what you're thinking," Damon said quietly. His hands were steady on the steering wheel, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror to make sure they weren't being followed. Lyra turned to study his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way the morning light caught in his dark hair, the careful control he maintained even now when they were safe and alone. "I'm thinking about choices," she said finally. "What about them?" "For 3 years I've been choosing fear, choosing to run instead of face whatever was chasing me, choosing isolation over connection." She shifted in her seat to face him more fully. "This morning, when Victor came for me, you gave me a different choice." His jaw tightened. "I gave you protection. That's different." "No." The word came out more firmly than she'd intended. "You showed me what it looks like when someone chooses to fight for me instead of asking me to keep running. You showed me what it means to have someone in my corner." They crested a hill, and suddenly the forest opened up to reveal a valley dotted with cabins and larger buildings. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could see people moving between the structures with the easy familiarity of home. "Your pack," she breathed. "Ah, pack," he corrected softly, "if you want it to be." The words sent a flutter of something warm and dangerous through her chest. "Damon." "I know." He pulled the truck over to the side of the road, cutting the engine. "I know you're not ready for everything yet, but Lyra, I need you to understand something." He turned to face her fully, and she could see the gold threading through his eyes again. Not the cold fire of battle this time, but something warmer, more intimate. "I've been half alive for 3 years," he said quietly, "going through the motions of being an alpha king, managing pack business, settling disputes, but feeling like part of my soul was missing. Because it was. Because you were out there somewhere, afraid of me, and I couldn't do anything about it." Her throat tightened. "Damon, let me finish." His voice was gentle but insistent. "This morning, when I thought I might lose you again, when I realized how close Victor had come to taking you away from me permanently, I knew I couldn't keep pretending that I'm okay with careful distance and patient waiting." He reached across the space between them, covering her hand with his. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, the bond singing with approval. "I'm not asking you to mate with me today," he continued. "I'm not asking you to accept the bond, or move into my house, or take on the responsibilities of being a Luna. But I am asking you to stop running. Not just from Victor or the threats that are behind us, but from this, from us." She stared down at their joined hands. His was so much larger than hers, scarred from years of fighting and leading, but infinitely gentle as his thumb traced across her knuckles. "What would that look like?" she whispered. "Stopping running? It would look like staying. Here, in the valley, where I can protect you and you can figure out who you are when you're not afraid." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "It would look like letting me court you properly, the way I should have 3 years ago." "Court me." The gold in his eyes flared. "Dinner dates, walks through the forest, conversations that last until dawn. Time for you to see who I am when I'm not the Alpha King, just the man who's been in love with you since the moment he caught your scent." Her breath hitched. "You love me. Desperately." The admission was raw, unguarded. "Completely, hopelessly. I know you're not ready to hear that, not ready to say it back, but I needed you to know." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd been loved before, or thought she had, but never like this. Never with this bone-deep certainty, this unwavering devotion that asked for nothing in return except the chance to prove itself. "I'm scared," she admitted. Of me?" "Of this," she gestured between them, encompassing the bond and the attraction, and the way he looked at her like she was precious beyond measure. "Of wanting something this much, of letting myself hope that maybe I've found something worth staying for." His expression softened. "What would it take for you to try? What would you need to feel safe enough to stay?" She thought about it seriously, weighing her fears against the warmth in her chest whenever she looked at him. Honesty, complete honesty about what being your mate would mean, what the pack would expect from me, what my life would look like. Done. And time, real time to get to know you, to understand the bond without pressure to accept it immediately. However long you need. And choice. Her voice grew stronger. The knowledge that if I decide this isn't right for me, if I decide I'm not ready for this kind of life, I can leave without consequences. Something flickered across his face, pain, loss, but he nodded. "If that's what you truly want, I won't stop you." The sincerity in his voice was devastating. She could see what the words cost him, the way his entire body tensed with the effort of making the promise. But he meant it. Somehow she knew he meant it. "Okay," she said quietly. His eyes snapped to hers. "Okay. I'll stay. I'll try." She turned her hand palm up, threading their fingers together properly. "I'll let you court me, Damon Blackthorne, but I have one condition." "Anything." "Stop being so careful with me." The words came out in a rush. "Stop treating me like I'm going to break if you touch me or look at me wrong. I survived 3 years on my own. I'm stronger than you think I am." His grip on her hand tightened. "You have no idea how strong I think you are." "Show me." The challenge hung in the air between them, loaded with 3 years of separation and careful restraint and desperate wanting. When Damon moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator, sliding across the bench seat until he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. Instead of answering, she reached up and cupped his face in her free hand, marvelling at the way he leaned into the touch like a man starving for contact. "I'm sure," she whispered. The kiss was everything she'd been afraid to want, gentle but demanding, controlled but desperate. His lips moved against hers with 3 years of longing behind them, and she could taste the restraint he was still holding on to, the careful leash he kept on his own need. The bond flared between them like a lit fuse, sending heat spiralling through her veins. She gasped against his mouth, and he took advantage of her parted lips to deepen the kiss, his tongue stroking against hers with devastating skill. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. His forehead rested against hers, his eyes blazing gold in the morning light. "Lyra," he breathed. "I know." She could feel the bond humming between them now, stronger than ever before, not demanding exactly, but patient, waiting for her to be ready to accept everything it offered. "I can feel it, the connection." "How does it feel?" She considered the question seriously. The golden thread in her chest was warm now, pulsing with contentment and possibility. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. "Like coming home," she said softly. His smile was radiant. "Good. That's exactly what it should feel like." She looked past him to the valley spread out below them, at the packlands that could be hers if she chose to stay, at the life she could build here if she was brave enough to reach for it. "Take me home," she said. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She squeezed his hand, feeling the rightness of the decision settle into her bones. "For the first time in my life, I'm absolutely sure." When he kissed her again, it tasted like promise, like hope, like the beginning of something neither of them had been brave enough to dream of, like forever. 2 months later, Lyra woke to the sound of rain on the cabin roof, and Damon's arm tightened around her waist. She lay still for a moment, marvelling at how different this felt from all those mornings she'd woken alone in strange rooms, listening for footsteps that might mean danger. Now the weight of his arm was comfort, not trap, safety, not threat. "Good morning," he murmured against her hair, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning." She turned in his arms, smiling at the way his dark hair stuck up at impossible angles. Even after 2 months, she sometimes couldn't believe she was allowed to see him like this, rumpled and relaxed and completely hers. They'd taken it slow, just as he'd promised. Dinners by the fire where he told her stories about the pack's history. Long walks through the forest where she learned the boundaries of their territory and the names of every family that called it home. Quiet conversations that lasted until dawn, sharing pieces of themselves like precious gifts. The pack had accepted her with a warmth that still surprised her. Sarah, Damon's second in command, had become a fierce friend. Old Marcus, not the cousin who'd tried to hurt her, but the pack's gentle healer, had taught her about the herbs that grew wild in the mountain valleys. The children had taken to following her around, fascinated by the woman who'd captured their alpha's heart. And through it all, the bond between them had grown stronger, deeper, more natural, like a song she was finally learning to sing. "What's the plan today?" she asked, tracing lazy patterns on his chest. "Pack council meeting this morning, border patrol reports this afternoon." His hand stroked down her back, sending familiar shivers through her. But tonight, if you're interested, I thought we might have dinner at the lake house." The lake house. They'd been there twice before, both times for quiet picnics where they could be completely alone, away from the pack's curious eyes and protective hovering, just Damon and Lyra and the bond humming between them like a living thing. "That sounds perfect," she said. "Good." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Because there's something I want to ask you." Before she could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. Damon's posture changed instantly, the relaxed lover replaced by the alert Alpha. "What is it?" he called. "Alpha, you need to see this." Sarah's voice was tight with concern. "We've got visitors at the north gate." Damon was already moving, pulling on clothes with practiced efficiency. "Who?" "The Council of Alphas, all 12 of them. They're demanding an audience." Lyra felt her blood go cold. The Council of Alphas was the governing body for all shifter packs in North America. They only travelled together for matters of extreme importance: wars, territorial disputes, challenges to Alpha authority. "Did they say what they want?" Damon asked, his voice carefully neutral. "They're asking about your mate." Sarah's pause was loaded with meaning. "About whether the rumours are true." Damon went very still. When he looked at Lyra, his expression was carefully blank, but she could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. "Get dressed," he said quietly. "Quickly." Lyra's hands shook as she pulled on her clothes. She'd known this moment would come eventually. Damon was the Alpha King, the most powerful shifter leader on the continent. His choice of mate wasn't just personal, it was political. And she was nobody. A packless wolf with no family, no connections, no status. Exactly the kind of choice that would make the council nervous. "Hey," Damon caught her hands, stilling their trembling. "Look at me." She met his eyes, seeing nothing but calm certainty there. "Whatever they want, whatever they say, you belong here. With me, with this pack, that's not negotiable." "But if they—" "No." His voice was firm, final. "There is no scenario where I choose politics over you. There is no argument compelling enough to make me give you up. You need to know that." The absolute conviction in his voice steadied her. This was the Alpha King speaking now, not just the man who loved her. And he was telling her that she came first. Above duty, above politics, above everything. "Okay," she said quietly. "I trust you." "Good." He kissed her forehead, gentle and reassuring. "Now let's go remind the council why challenging my decisions is generally a bad idea." The pack's main hall was tense when they arrived. Pack members lined the walls, their expressions carefully neutral, but their posture ready for trouble. At the centre of the room, 12 alphas sat in a semicircle, their combined power making the air thick and oppressive. Lyra recognised some of them from pack gatherings over the years. Alpha Morrison from the Montana Territories, silver-haired and stern. Alpha Chen from the Pacific Northwest, young but ruthless. Alpha Rodriguez from the Desert Packs, whose reputation for cunning was legendary. At their centre sat Alpha Helena Voss, the council's speaker, elegant, coldly beautiful, and utterly without mercy. "Damon," Helena's voice was silk over steel, "thank you for joining us." "Helena." Damon's tone was equally polite, equally dangerous. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "We're here about her." Helena's gaze flicked to Lyra, dismissive and calculating. "About the rumours that you've taken a mate without council approval." "I don't require council approval for personal decisions." "You do when those decisions affect the stability of the entire shifter community." Alpha Morrison leaned forward, his weathered face hard with disapproval. "Your mate will be queen of all North American packs. Her bloodline, her family connections, her political value, these things matter." "Her worth isn't up for debate," Damon said quietly. "Isn't it?" Alpha Chen spoke for the first time, his voice deceptively mild. "She's packless, Damon. No family, no allies, no political connections. What does she bring to this union besides your personal attachment?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Lyra felt the weight of 12 alpha gazes on her, measuring and finding her wanting. For a moment the old fears rose up, the certainty that she was nothing, nobody, not worth the trouble she'd cause. Then Damon moved. It wasn't a large gesture, just a half-step that put him partially in front of her. But the message was clear. Anyone who wanted to hurt her would have to go through him first. "What she brings," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a king, "is irrelevant to anyone but me. She is my mate, my choice, my queen. And if the council has a problem with that, you're welcome to challenge me for leadership." The silence that followed was deafening. Challenging an alpha king was technically possible, but it was also essentially suicide. Damon hadn't held his position for 15 years by being weak. "We're not challenging your leadership," Helena said carefully. "We're simply concerned about the precedent this sets. If alphas can choose mates based purely on personal preference—" "Then they can choose happiness over politics," Lyra interrupted, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "They can choose love over strategic alliances. They can choose to trust that the bond knows what it's doing." Every eye in the room turned to her. She felt Damon's surprise, his pride, his unwavering support through the bond. "The bond is a sacred thing," she continued, finding her courage in his presence. "It doesn't care about bloodlines or political connections. It cares about compatibility, about two souls that complete each other. And if that's not enough for the council, then maybe the problem isn't with Damon's choice of mate. Maybe the problem is with a system that values politics over the most fundamental truth of our nature." Alpha Rodriguez actually smiled at that, a small curve of his lips that suggested approval. "Well said, young queen." "She's not queen yet," Alpha Morrison growled. "Isn't she?" Damon's voice was soft, dangerous. "Because if you're asking me to choose between her and the crown, I can make that decision right now." The threat was unmistakable. Damon would abdicate rather than give her up. The implications of that sent ripples of shock through the assembled alphas. "That won't be necessary," Helena said quickly. Too quickly. "The council recognizes your right to choose your own mate. We simply wanted to meet her, to assess her suitability." "And your assessment?" Damon asked. Helena looked at Lyra for a long moment, weighing and measuring. Finally, she inclined her head slightly. "She'll do." The dismissal stung, but Lyra found she didn't care. She had Damon's respect, his love, his absolute devotion. The council's approval was irrelevant. "Excellent." Damon's smile was sharp as a blade. "Then I believe we're done here." The council filed out with varying degrees of grace, leaving Damon and Lyra alone with the pack. The silence stretched for a moment, then Sarah started clapping. The rest of the pack joined in, their applause filling the hall with warmth and approval. "Well done, Luna," Sarah said, using Lyra's title for the first time. "Though I think you gave Alpha Morrison heart palpitations." Lyra laughed, feeling giddy with relief and triumph. "Good. Someone needs to shake up their expectations occasionally." That evening they sat by the lake as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the water gold and crimson. Damon had been quiet since the council's departure, lost in thought. "Regrets?" Lyra asked softly. "None." He turned to her, his expression serious. "But I do have a question." "Oh?" He slid off the fallen log they'd been sharing, dropping to one knee in front of her. Lyra's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. "I was going to wait," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Give you more time to adjust, to be sure. But after today, after watching you stand up to the council and claim your place—" He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring set with a stone that seemed to capture starlight. "Lyra, will you marry me? Will you be my queen, my mate, my everything?" The words she'd been afraid to want, afraid to hope for, hung in the air between them. And suddenly the answer was the easiest thing in the world. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, of course, yes." The ring slid onto her finger like it belonged there, warm and perfect and right. When Damon kissed her, she could taste his joy, his relief, his overwhelming love. Later, as they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, Lyra marvelled at how different her life had become. 2 months ago, she'd been running scared, convinced she'd never find a place to belong. Now she was engaged to the Alpha King, accepted by his pack, and finally completely home. "Any regrets?" Damon asked, echoing her earlier question. She looked around at the valley spread out before them, at the lights twinkling in cabin windows, at the man beside her who'd waited 3 years for her to stop running. "None," she said, and meant it completely. Where are you listening from? I love hearing your thoughts in the comments below. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people hear these stories. Thank you for listening.